Welcome back to the show. We are fueled by Hattie B's Hot Chicken. National Signing Day took place yesterday, even though there are still the opportunity for players such as David Sanders Jr., the offensive tackle prospect that Vols fans are lusting over. The expectation is that he is going to sign somewhere today. Yes, Lucas? That is the expectation.
No, I don't know that is the expectation.
Wasn't that in the reporting yesterday?
I don't know. This is why we bring on. Why are you asking me all the questions we're supposed to be asking Ryan?
Well, because
Callahan?
I would like for us to sound somewhat informed before we bring on the actual informed people like Ryan Callahan of Go Vols 247 Sports. At Ryan Callahan 247 is where you, of course, follow him. So please make us smarter about all of these things. Ryan, how are you?
Doing well. How are you guys?
We're great. The David Sanders Jr. thing is obviously the thing that people are hand-wringing the most over, given what Josh Heupel has not been able to accomplish as a recruiter with the offensive line situation specifically, and kind of the messaging around potentially Ohio State being able to flip this kid. What's the latest?
Yeah, it's still a situation worth watching. To the point you guys were just discussing, we don't know for sure that David Sanders will be signing today. I think this is one of those situations where Tennessee still has the inside track. There's still reason to think this is going to work out for Tennessee in the end, but it's got to get there. And obviously he didn't sign yesterday for a reason. So there's still some haggling, I believe, over some details of, NIL deals and things like that. I think that's been sort of the crux of this since he went to Ohio State a couple weeks ago to attend the Buckeyes game against Indiana. So it's obviously, I don't think Tennessee went into signing day expecting this to happen. It's sort of a bit of a surprise to them that it played out this way and that he didn't end up signing yesterday because of it. But it's also not a surprise completely, given that it got to the point of him visiting Ohio State a couple weeks ago. So it drags on. How long it will drag on, we don't know. There's been no official word from the family, from David Sanders himself. But I do think there is still reason in the end to think that he probably still ends up at Tennessee. It's just a matter of when and how it's going to play out.
Ryan, is there any thought to the circumstances around this? Is it because he wants to sign a certain way with certain people? Obviously, the first thing a lot of folks would jump to is it NIL related? Is there any school of thought about why it's kind of gone down this path of uncertainty?
It's been related to NIL throughout this discussion, throughout this process of the past couple weeks at least, and it goes back farther than that. But we knew there was a chance that this would turn into something that led to him visiting another school. I think Ohio State was just sort of the natural choice because they, for the most part, finished second when he made his original decision back in August. So it's definitely not a situation where David Sanders is, in my mind, wrestling with whether he wants to go to Tennessee and he has cold feet for some reason. It's not a situation like that. I think it is NIL related. I don't think that means that it's that they're looking for more money necessarily. I don't think it's one of those things where people, when they hear NIL, they automatically assume, okay, it's a bidding war or they're holding out for more money. I don't think it's that. I think there's some details of the deal that they've been working on and haven't been ironed out yet. And we'll just have to wait and see how that all plays out. It's sort of a game of chicken sometimes with things like that. Which side's going to blink first? And we don't really know how that's going to play out. But again, there are more reasons right now to think he still ends up with Tennessee. But yeah, there are still, I believe, some details related to NIL discussions that are still being hammered out.
At Ryan Callahan 247 is where you can follow him. I understand why it would frustrate a fan base, just the idea of a player not necessarily asking for more money or an agent necessarily asking for money specific to this situation, but just a player exercising leverage and the representation exercising leverage. I think that's completely acceptable, even though I understand why it would put a fan base in knots.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's still just new to college football and college sports. And so for fans, it's tough to hear that on early signing day when the crown jewel of your class who's been committed for more than 3 months now is, suddenly, from their perspective, suddenly is holding out for more or whatever their impression might be. So yeah, the optics of it are weird. And yeah, I think a lot of fans out there don't like that it's taken a step toward becoming like the NFL. It feels like the number one draft pick in a draft class holding out for more back when you'd see that a lot. So it's one of those types of deals that's tough for fans to accept, but it's going to happen more and more. And people are still adjusting to this NIL world we're in. I think we've seen that this year. There have been more flips than in the last couple of years. So we're seeing now that schools have, like we saw last year, the NIL playing field has sort of leveled out. There are more schools willing to be aggressive with NIL deals, and that's leading to players, again, sort of using their leverage and in some cases flipping at the last minute. So everyone's still adjusting, and in this case, you've got, so many players that are dealing with agents these days, and when you've got agents that, have some ideas or know what they're doing, they can come up with ways to sort of bargain for more, even if it's not necessarily more money. So there are always things that are going to happen like that, and this is just sort of for Tennessee fans, an unfortunate example that's their first time really dealing with something like this where it's kind of delayed a player that should be signed by now.
So Tennessee, the number 10 class in the country, according to 247 Sports. Apart from David Sanders' watch, to you, Ryan, what was the biggest headline from Wednesday for Tennessee?
Well, I think no question the addition of Isaiah Campbell. It's a big-time pickup, landing the 4-star defensive lineman from Durham, North Carolina. He's a former Clemson commitment, top 50 player nationally, becomes kind of the crown jewel of that defensive line class. That's a really good defensive line class, top to bottom. Counting Marion Dye out of Indiana, Tennessee has 2 top 100 players in this class on the defensive line, and that's not even including Ethan Utley, another 4-star from Nashville, Jaden Lofton, a 4-star from New Jersey, Charles House, kind of an overlooked part of that defensive line class, a high 3-star out of North Carolina that they beat out Georgia and Alabama for back in the summer. So that's some really nice wins there, and they needed some at that position. So Isaiah Campbell, to me, the big story, but maybe a close second to that, flipping Jaden Perlotti, the 4-star linebacker from USC. I mean, that's a guy they've been after for a long time. Back in the summer, it looked like they were on the verge of stealing him away from Georgia after he was committed to Georgia for more than 18 months. Instead, he goes to USC in late July, and the next day or two, he's flipping to the Trojans instead. So Tennessee was in that one for a while before the summer, and then just stayed on him after he committed to USC. And in the end, it works out for them with a flip on signing day. So to get a guy like that to kind of round out that linebacker class, 4 linebackers, 3 of them 4-stars, those are the types of wins Tennessee's not had enough in recent years. So to get 2 really quality players like that at those positions in particular, really big additions for Tennessee on signing day.
At this point, we're kind of used to the December early signing period, but, it wasn't that many years ago, Ryan, that the only day I would fake sick in high school of the year was National Signing Day in February to keep up with all the coverage. It's very different now, obviously. I'm curious for you, as someone who's covered this for a long time, what is the biggest difference at this point in covering the early signing period on the week of conference championship games versus the day in February that we all looked forward to after the end of the college football season?
Yeah, and this year's the first year of early signing day being the first Wednesday in December, so it being moved up a couple weeks really does change things. That for me is the biggest difference, is the build-up immediately before early signing day. We used to have coaches would be on the road right now recruiting, making in-home visits. You would see a potential build-up to a signing day flip. Now a lot of the conversations that are happening regarding a flip are just happening over the phone, or they're having to be for game visits at the tail end of the regular season. That didn't always have to be the case in the past. So it's just very different, the timing of all this. This year they've done this to move the signing day away from the playoff, and also to sort of clear the way for the transfer portal craziness that's about to take over the world and just dominate the landscape beginning Monday when the portal officially opens. That's already started with players announcing they're entering the portal. But that's about to take over everything for the next few weeks. And so they're trying it this way. Hopefully it gives coaches at least some sort of division of the calendar to where they can focus their attention on maintaining their current guys on the roster, and then also looking for help in the portal. But it is very different. It takes away a little bit from the drama leading up to signing day, but also yesterday we did see more flips again. So it's sort of been this year a little bit more like what we were used to 5-10 years ago, where you would actually see a little more activity on signing day. There's always been some, but this year felt a little more active. And I think that's because, again, the NIL landscape has become a little more competitive, and schools that you wouldn't necessarily think are capable of, overcoming a team having a player committed for months, or they're making aggressive pushes that are causing there to be some drama late in the game. And that's at least added some excitement, I think, for fans.
Go Vols 247 is where you read. Our guest, Ryan Callahan, breaking it down here with us. So from recruiting to the football team that is currently in place for the University of Tennessee, what's the latest on some of these injuries? Dante Thornton, Brew McCoy, Tennessee's wide receiver core looking a little banged up after that last game.
Yeah, well, we haven't. They've been back on the practice field a little bit this week. I think they're, for anyone who would be, potentially on the fence right now, I think they're kind of taking it easy with a lot of those guys, trying to make sure that they are as healthy as possible since they have some downtime before they have to play in the college football playoff. Haven't heard anything that suggests that any of those guys is going to be out for Tennessee's next game. I think it's a deal where, for the most part, they're not necessarily serious injuries, and there's at least a good chance those guys will be able to play through things given a few weeks off. So for now, trying to give those guys some time to rest. But yeah, in a lot of ways, we'll have to just sort of wait until game week to see what kind of progress they've made. Everyone's kind of banged up this time of year, so definitely not unusual for Tennessee to get to that last game of the regular season, often against Vanderbilt, and have some guys that are not usually out there, like we saw at the wide receiver position with Mike Matthews playing a lot, the true freshman, and some other guys like that. So they were hobbling to the finish line a little bit, but I think the expectation is that most, if not all, of those guys should be okay once they get to game week here in a couple weeks.
Ryan, how are you watching Conference Championship weekend in relation to how it could affect Tennessee with the final ranking coming out Sunday? Obviously, we're looking at who the Vols could potentially play as that number 8 seed, but has all hope essentially been lost over there in Knoxville about Tennessee, seeing a shakeup that is enough to where they could actually host a playoff game, or is there still that sliver of hope that something dramatic could happen on Saturday to change that?
Yeah, I think there's still a sliver of hope. I don't know that it's a very big one, but I think there's at least some level of optimism that maybe if the right teams lose, there's still a scenario that could allow Tennessee to move up. I will say the committee's sort of indications that the teams that don't play this week aren't going to really have a chance to move up this week. That sort of took the wind out of their sails a little bit. But there are some teams ahead of Tennessee that you don't know yet how the committee is going to look at a conference championship game loss. That's one of the things we've been sort of skeptical and wondering how they would treat that. You've got some people saying, a loss is a loss. If Georgia loses by a couple touchdowns to Texas, they've got to be hurt by that, right? But then some people are of the belief that the conference championship games are going to be protected, and in doing so, the committee's not really going to hurt anyone that much for a loss. So we'll kind of have to wait and see Sunday. But I think there's the hopeful scenario for Tennessee. If you want a home game, I think you need Penn State to lose. I think you need Georgia to lose, with the hope being that one of those teams somehow falls behind Tennessee in the rankings. Anything outside of that, probably not going to make a huge difference, but there is a chance, depending on how those games play out, maybe one of those teams could fall past Tennessee in the right scenario. Probably Georgia would be the best bet, but even that, some people still skeptical because, again, how much will the committee really cause a team to fall in the rankings based on a loss in a conference title game when they don't want to do anything to endanger the future of conference championship games?
I feel like I'm kind of with Danny White. I kind of want the BCS back after all this committee stuff, or a BCS-like model back after all this committee stuff, because I just want to know what the path forward is, or what the logic is, rather than just throwing my hands up every Tuesday night and be like, all right, I guess that's what it's going to be this week. Yeah,
and no matter what, because there are humans involved and because the logic does sometimes seem to shift from one week to the next, there's this belief that's always going to be there among some people that they're looking for the result and they'll come up with the logic needed to justify the result. So, for instance, a lot of people out there really frustrated that a 3-loss Alabama team seems to be getting the benefit of the doubt and it looks like has a good chance of still making the playoff. So some people out there, fair or not, are just going to assume, hey, they're looking for a reason to put Alabama in, whatever that justification is, the win over Georgia, things they have on their resume, they'll point to that because that's what they ultimately want. So whether that's fair or not, that's just the reality when you have humans involved. So to your point, I think there are some people that would love to see just an objective, fair, a system that everyone understands and knows that human error is not involved. But I'll say this, the flip side to that, and this was obviously the argument against the BCS years ago, you want people to be able to see when a team on the field just looks better. And computers can't do that, and there are some cases where that's valued. So I think you still need to have that. So it's a tough debate, but I understand it because right now you have the appearance that's going to give fans the ammo they need to say, hey, they just want a certain result.
Justice for South Carolina, truly. I mean, the reality of the situation is you're never going to make everybody happy no matter how they go about deciding these things in the future. Ryan Callahan and his information always makes us happy when he stops by. Go Vols 247 is where you can check out all his work at Ryan Callahan 247 on Twitter to keep updated with the latest on the Tennessee Vols. Thank you, buddy.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
That's Ryan Callahan with us on 104.5 The Zone.
Still a sliver of hope of hosting a playoff game in Neyland.
Yeah, not really, though.
Yeah, you're talking about...
Right? Like,
yeah.
really.
I agree. And Ryan acknowledged that. But you're talking about Penn State having to get drilled by Oregon. I mean, just absolutely routed.
And Oregon really isn't doing that to anybody this year.
And no, they've done that to quite a few teams. I mean, they ran Washington off the field. They've run Michigan off the field.
Yeah, but teams that belong at the same
Right.
in the same stratosphere
right.
as Oregon. I'm talking about quality opponents, not a bunch of Big Ten slacks.
The only playoff caliber teams Oregon has played are Ohio State and Boise, and they narrowly won those games. Still very impressive wins. But yeah, you need Penn State to get blown out. And even then, you're asking the committee to drop Penn State 4 spots behind Tennessee when Ohio State just lost embarrassingly at home to Michigan and dropped 4 spots. So I doubt they would give Penn State that same penalty for losing a conference championship game against the number 1 team in the country, no matter how bad it is. And then in terms of Georgia's only number 5, so you only need them to drop 3 spots, or 2, I should say. But are they really going to drop Georgia below Tennessee when Georgia has the head-to-head? I don't think so. Even if Georgia loses to Texas and losing in dominant fashion, Georgia has proof of concept of beating that Texas team in dominant fashion this season. So Vols are going to be on the road. The question is, will it be Ohio State or will it be against Penn State? Brandon in the FNMA chat says there needs to be a Ken Palm.
I like that idea.
For football.
I like that idea a lot.
There is going to be a new number 1 team in the country on the hardwood come Sunday's AP poll. You up to date on this? You keeping up?
Yeah.
It's not your Hoosiers.
I'm aware.
Kansas loses to Creighton in a big upset last night. Number 1 Kansas. Auburn.
That was a lot of fun basketball
really
last
fun.
night.
Auburn.
Duke just barely got by Auburn.
It was a great game. Number 2, Auburn losing at Duke. So number 3, Tennessee is going to be the number 1 team in the country come the next AP poll.
I want to be happy for you. I really do.
It's okay. You don't have to be.
I'm not.
I'm enjoying your misery.
At least some things stay consistent. 615-737-1045, the number if you want to get involved. Before we go to phone calls and get that kind of stuff going here on how Vols fans are feeling right now, because we got some time, right? We got some time for Tennessee to kind of figure out these things and move forward, or how things are going to play out in conference championship weekend. We'll see what happens in the SEC, specifically in Atlanta over the weekend as well. But kind of going back to the reason that we had Ryan on, which is recruiting. If David Sanders ends up flipping Ohio State or elsewhere, I don't know what kind of dark horse situation could be out there. The reporting, though, seems like it's Tennessee or Ohio State at this point in time. How big a knock is that on Josh Heupel and staff to have this kid committed for 3 months, and then in, I don't know, a span of, when was the Indiana-Ohio State game? 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? In a span of basically 3 weeks, it seems like all of this has unraveled very, very quickly. Or at least it gives the optics of all of this unraveling very, very quickly, even if, as Ryan Callahan said, they're just fine-tuning some details, that there is still doubt around that. Not a good look.
Yeah, for sure. It is so hard to attribute responsibility on whose fault is this that this kid flipped Ohio State when you're talking about 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and the NIL factor and family and people pulling them in different directions.
Well, yes, it's sports. We have to blame somebody.
I know. I understand. There's just so much variance with what's going on with one particular kid. But yeah, that would shine a light on a glaring trend of missing on blue chip offensive tackles time in and time out. And it would bump Tennessee out of the top 10 if they lose that commitment from David Sanders. It's doing a lot to prop them up right now. He's the number 5 player in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. So that would probably bump Tennessee below Florida. They'd move into the top 10. And it feels pretty critical. I don't know how you view this signing class as a big success if you lose David Sanders Jr. Again, everybody like Ryan Callahan is saying there's not any real reason to think he's not going to sign with Tennessee. and just kind of still keeping an eye on it.
It's just the time.
And waiting for it to happen.
Yeah. 104.5 The Zone is inviting you to join us next Tuesday. We'll be at Nissan Stadium to benefit Salvation Army's Forgotten Angels. We, of course, as always, need your help. For the 17th year, Toy Field, presented by First Horizon Bank, is going to help fulfill the dreams of thousands of kids in need this holiday season. So while you're out doing your holiday shopping, please, if you would be so kind, pick up an extra toy or, more importantly, because we get far less of these, a gift for a senior. If you are so inclined to do that as well, that would be hugely appreciated. And bring it to Nissan Stadium next Tuesday. We'll be broadcasting from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., all 4 shows out there. Special thanks to Law Tigers, O'Charlie's, and A.O. Smith. To learn more, visit 1045thezone.com/events today. Toy Field, always a good time. Coming up next, it's been a really disappointing pro sports season in the city of Nashville. So we're going to take a look at these 2 disappointments because one of them lost again last night. Which has had the more disappointing season, the Tennessee Titans or the Nashville Predators? I'm Buck Reising. It's 104.5 The Zone.